Hey guys, how's it going? Jay Sensational here. Welcome back to the channel. Sorry that I missed out on a couple of videos with the teasers and things like that I normally do for like when that comes out, but I thought we'd do something a little bit different this season. So instead of just like doing like the teaser reviews when they come up, because I think that I give some relatively like, just very broad, vague, general statements about it. No, we are going to give some hot takes out here. We're going to give some ratings and reviews for every single card that has been revealed from the Domination set. And we're going to go at it, man. We have a little bit of a ranking system set up here. So we have the 1 through 5 stars, 1 star being an unplayable kind of pack filler, 2 stars being like a bad or like a meme tier card. 3 stars is like a cool one of that you can put as like a tech card or like some sort of like tier 2 deck kind of card. 4 stars being like a tier 1 meta deck staple or just a card that you can easily just slot in and replace another card. I mean, it's like power creeping an existing card in like a tier 1 deck. And then 5 stars reserved for a meta defining card or a card that I think is an absolute star within this expansion and just one of the strongest in just pure power levels overall. The rankings can be a little bit not like super meticulous, but I tried my best here, and overall it's just a general thing. And I thought it'd be fun to like do another one of these about like 2 or 3 weeks after the expansion and just kind of see where our predictions landed. But hopefully that all made sense. Let's jump into the video and let's rate some of the cards. All right, starting off with the Vayne cards I recently gotten. So I know I haven't actually done any of the talking about what Vayne is. So for anyone who hasn't seen the new cards, I just will try to briefly talk about what the champions do, and then before I give a rating. So this might be a little bit longer video, but we'll try to go through these as quick as we can. So Vayne is our new Demacia champion. She's a 3-mana 3/4 that summons on summon around start, create a tumble in hand, and then tumble is a spell that starts a free attack, but we'll get into that after this one. And if you have one, reduce its cost by 1. Level up is I see you attack 4 times, very similar to something like MF or Quinn. Now let's just quickly go to tumble, just because well, okay, let's give let's just give Vayne her rating first. I'm gonna give Vayne a 4 out of 5 stars. Her tumble, which we'll get to the next page, is a 3-mana that starts as a 3-mana spell that says equip an ally with a weapon that costs her less and start a free attack. So I think just by itself, it's pretty cool. When she levels up, that tumble just becomes a 0-mana free attack, which can be very good. Something that we've seen the power of Ruined Reckoner starting free attacks, or even just the idea of rally or cataclysm on scout unit can kind of just proc a free attack. And not only that, it allows us to equip a weapon for free, so long as it's less than 2 mana. So very similar to the card called Catch. I give it a 4 out of 5 stars because I think it's just very solid. We've seen with the recent improvise and equip cards, we've seen the ability to just play out a scout unit as early as turn 2, and if we have token on turn 3, we can get 2 attacks out of Vayne on turn 3 and be able to flip a card like Vayne out as early as turn 5. And now of course we can also do that with Valor and other things as well. But I think Vayne overall is really cool. Even if you don't pull off something ridiculous like that and just play Vayne on turn 3, even getting like a 1-mana or 2-mana tumble on your next attack token can be very good because it's just an easy way of applying pressure. Maybe you can use it as a pseudo rally on a scout unit, and it's just very solid, and also being equip additional weapon. Now her champion spell is Condemn, which is an ally strikes an enemy. If you've attacked 2 times this round, I cost 5 less. So the original cost is 6. If you fulfill the condition, it costs 1, which is pretty cool. But unfortunately, I think this condition is a little bit tricky to activate. So you have to attack once and then attack a second time, or you attack with a scout unit, you attack second time, or you attack once, rally, whatever it may be, or you like double tumble in a turn if you can even manage to do that. But I think overall, like, strike spells aren't really something that you want to do after you meet the condition. It's something that's a lot better if you can use it before you meet the condition, so that you might clear away one of the bigger blockers to allow you to have a better attack or something like that. So I think the overall concept of of like striking an enemy after you attack is a little bit weak. Now it is a one-way strike, so it's somewhat similar to concerted strike, albeit only to one ally. But I think it's just a little bit too niche to activate this condition. And if you're cat playing it for 6 mana, then there's better cards like concerted strike or even single combat. So I'm giving Condemn a nice 2 stars. It's cool because it's a Vayne champion spell, so it's going to have its uses there. If I do want to main deck this card, probably not. Am I happy to generate this card off of like Barrow's Financer? That's actually pretty decent. So it's like it falls in the pool of cards that are decent to generate, but not cards that you want to run in the deck. Onto the next set of cards, we have some of the Vayne support cards, and we'll quickly just look at Tumble really quick because that's where we kind of left off. Tumble is a 3-mana slow speed spell, and as a reminder, Tumble can get discounted with every round start so long as Vayne is on your board. And you equip an ally with equipment that costs in hand that costs 2 or less, very much so like Catch. And then that unit starts a free attack, which is really, really decent, especially if this can cost 2 mana, 1 mana, 0 mana. And now all of her followers follow suit onto this similar kind of idea with equipped allies. We have Kindhearted Recruit, a 5-mana 5/5 that says when I'm summoned, give equip allies barrier this round. This card is definitely interesting. It reminds me of Brightsteel Legion, which is a 9-mana 9/9 that on summon and attack give all allies barrier. And this one obviously comes down 4 turns earlier, but only gives equipped allies barrier. Now, I think with some of the other cards that allow you to automatically equip equipment such as Catch, Tumble, and then this Widow's Huntress, this condition is not too hard to meet. So this can be a pretty good defensive tool if you can just chum it down and get 2 barriers out. That's a very, very good card. Or if you put on some challenges and things like that on an attack turn, that's also very, very decent. So this card overall, I think is a nice, solid 3 stars. It's still a little bit awkward just because 5 drops, depending on the kind of deck you're running, like a more aggressive scouts kind of deck, then obviously this card doesn't really fit in when it's competing against some of the bigger 6 drops like Genevieve or Cythria. But in a more like mid-range kind of deck, depending on how fast the Vayne deck is running at, it seems pretty decent just to be able to stall out attacks or just gain value trades overall. So overall, this card seems decent. Now, I think the next card, Steadfast Elkin, is a lot better, just comparatively, being a 1-mana 2/2 are just very solid base stat lines. But also, when it's the first time I see an ally equipped, grant me tough. So 1-mana 2/2 tough, granted that it has to see an ally getting equipped, is really, really solid. I'm giving this a solid 4 stars. Even as a 1-mana 2/2, there's just no downside to that. It's a Sithra of Cloudfield, and 1-mana 2/2s just trade nicely as 1-drops. But having the ability to also gain tough just allows you to trade down super, super well. Also in Demacia or in any sort of region, if you're running equip cards and then you have like the cultist cards like Momentous Choice, all of a sudden a 2/4 tough unit for 2 mana, that can be very, very powerful in gaining you some very good early game trades. So just because it's a 1-drop that has so much flexibility and also just a good base stat line, I think this card is really solid. Now, I want to go over the Widow's Huntress. This is one of the cards that does automatically equip an equipment from hand that costs 2 or less. So it's a 4-mana 3/3 challenger with this kind of condition. Now, we've seen cards like Brutal Hunter in Noxus, which is a 4-mana 3/3 challenger that says give me quick attack. Now, that card hasn't really seen any play, but this card, I think equipments are definitely a little bit better than just straight up getting quick attack, because equipments could also be quick attack, but they also give some more base stats as well. We're going to see some really good equipments later on throughout the set, but just gaining some extra stats like this coming down as like a like a 5/3 challenger with quick attack, or like a 5/4 challenger with another keyword like overwhelm or whatever it may be. Because when we think about all the like the equipment cards, I like a +2 attack and +1 health, or like a +2 attack and something like quick attack, even just like scout, a 4-mana 4/3 challenger scout, like that's very, very decent, especially because you can still use that and buff it up. So in conjunction with some of the Hookmaster cards, or like the Ionian Hookmaster card, like I feel like the equipment pool being so decent, as well as some of the new Darkin equipments that we're getting, this card seems okay. But again, the whole issue with I think these kind of cards is just like the speed of the deck you're kind of playing. These are definitely a lot slower, more mid-rangey. Or as you can maybe go for more of like this OTK free attack, add a lot of pressure scouts kind of game plan, which maybe this card is a little bit too slow. We'll see. Comparatively, something like Combat Cook comes to mind, just that 4 mana slot. You're going to end up with a very similar stat line, but this has Challenger. Now you do have to have a weapon. So there's like a little bit of give and take there, but I think still just relatively pretty solid card. I don't think this card's like super phenomenal, but solid 3 stars from my perspective. And then for the last set of cards that go along with Vayne, we have the Blood Cursed Harpy, a 6 mana 6/4 scout that also has the same condition or the play effect of equipping with equipment that costs 2 or less from hand, but it has a very unique effect where the first time I would die while equipped, fully heal me and destroy the equipment instead. So it reminds me very similarly of the Immortal Fire, the Targon Invoke 8-drop elusive card that allows you to have a second life. I think this card's actually pretty decent. So 6 mana slot in Demacia is really relegated to a little, that's like pretty much the highest a lot of these Demacia decks go, whether it be like Jenny or Cythria. And I think this is actually pretty decent, just given the fact that Scout is synergized already with a lot of the champions they want to be running, such as Vayne, Quinn, Misfortune, things like that. But also just in any other slower mid-range deck, even if you compare this card to like Camp for the Doubt, this can just be very, very good because with Scout, you can give it an equipment like Overwhelm or Quick Attack, and all of a sudden it's applying a lot of pressure to your opponent that they're sort of forced to eventually trade into it. And then when they kill it off, you get it back, and it still has Scout, and while it doesn't have the equipment anymore, it's still just a nice unit to have around on board. You can play this defensively and then trade it off and then, you know, revive it as well. This can block quick attacks essentially because it dies and then strikes back. So this card looks pretty decent, honestly. I think I gave this a nice 4 stars because I think it's actually really decent compared to some of the other options at 6 mana. You can even play this in slower mid-range decks like Pantheon. And I honestly think it's pretty decent because Pantheon has equips. This card equips itself and then is just pretty tanky overall. It has Scout, challenges the board, seems pretty decent. Next card we have here is a Zealous Ranger Knight, a 2 mana 2/3 that says attack, give equip allies +1/+1 this round. This card, on the other hand, didn't really impress me that much. I think I just gave it a 2-star rating because I think this condition is going to be a lot more difficult than something like the I believe it was the Kind Heart that gave barrier, because this one comes down a lot earlier. If you place on turn 2, you're not going to have an equipped ally by that turn. So it's just coming down as a 2 mana 2/3, which isn't bad per se, but this is definitely the kind of card you want to be drawing a little bit later on the game, or doesn't really have much of an effect. You can block it once and then maybe have an equipped ally on turn 3 attack, and then you give that one equipped ally +1/+1 this round. But it's not even Grant. In Demacia, you already have Inspiring Light, which is one of the most fantastic go wide board buffs that you already have, and it's a permanent +1/+1 buff. So this card doesn't really like give me much hope in seeing like a very, very solid card. It doesn't equip itself, doesn't have any support for that. This card seems a little bit weak, and I think there's better payoffs for this equipped card, like kind of game plan. Now we have the next card, which is Faithful Watchdog. This one's also very, very cool. It's a 3 mana 2/3 that says if an ally has died this round, I cost 2 less, and then has the same play, equip me with the equipment that costs 2 less from hand. Now, this essentially could be a 1 mana 2/3 that equips, which, you know, as we all know, cheating out stats is very, very powerful. Has effect very similar to something like the Radiant Guardian. Granted that I think Radiant Guardian overall is a little bit hard to actually actively use. This card is pretty decent just because it comes down a lot earlier. You know, you're not having to hold up 5 mana to play a unit and just hope something dies. And again, with the same synergy that this thing has, I think it's pretty, pretty cool. So just like 1 mana cheating out stats, especially if an ally with an equipment dies. So let's say you like send in, like hypothetically, like Blood Curse Harpy in for its scout attack. It dies on the scout attack. I guess the equipment is destroyed, so that's not a good example. But let's say you send in a unit with an equipment on. When that unit dies, the equipment goes back into your hands, and then you can play it back out attached onto a 1 mana Faithful Watchdog. I think that's actually really, really decent. Makes fantastic use of the power level of equipment being able to bounce back in the hand. I think this card's actually really, really sick. Even for something like Darkin Bloodletters, like you're attacking with like a Darkin Thrall with the Bloodletters attached, it dies, you get this back, and then it's just a 3/3 for 1 mana, and then you can generate another Thrall off of that and keep going. I think this card is really fantastic. So I think I gave this card a 4 stars. Very, very cool. Next card is going to be the first 5-star rating I'm going to give to this entire set. And I think it might be a little bit surprising, but I think this card is actually really, really cool. So this card, Fish Fight, 2 mana slow speed spell in Demacia, an ally and an enemy strike each other. But if that ally is equipped, it strikes an enemy. So it's a one-way strike. And then the equipment is unequipped. So this is insane. It's a single way strike, albeit at slow speed. But I think the kicker here that a lot of people I think can easily see as a downside is to where your ally is unequipped is actually really, really synergistic with the entire idea of what Vayne wants to be doing. You have all these cards in your deck that will equip an equipment from hand. You have Tumble, which equips another card from hand. You can use Catch, which is also in Demacia. A lot of your cards want you to have an equipment in hand. And Fish Fight, I think, is phenomenal for that. You can equip an ally in a turn, strike it. So it's basically like a grappling hook, essentially. And then even though you can't really manually equip a weapon again for the second time in a turn, you can just use something like Faithful Watchdog to equip that weapon automatically for you. So just a 2 mana slow speed 1-way strike spell. I don't think that's enough of a, that's not like the biggest downside. Especially because you have some really decent cards that fight for board, like Faithful Watchdog and things like that. I think this card has fantastic payoffs, very little downsides, and actual synergy with the entirety of most of the cards in your deck. So I give this a nice 5 stars. I think this is a really, really cool card, fantastic synergy across the board, and I think has potential to be meta defining. We'll see about that. Moving on, we have a few more variety cards, and then I think we'll get to the next champion. But going from Demacia over to Noxus, we have some really, really cool cards. The first card on the left, we have a burst speeds 2 mana spell, Legionary Charge. Lets us draw an ally 5+ power or grow an ally to 5+ power or 5 power this round. So just off the bat, it comes off as a combat trick. Where it could either be close to something like an Elixir of Wrath or something like a Brother's Bond, just kind of combined into one, depending on obviously the base attack of your ally. If your ally has 0 attack, fantastic. If it has like 2 attack, that's pretty decent. But from there, it just gets a little bit worse. Because there's definitely, you're approaching like Might, like Weapon Hill. When you're getting like +2, +3. That's when like there's a lot more diminishing value, but when it's like +4, +5, obviously that's like a really, really sweet spot in just forcing your opponent into having bad trades across the board. So that can always be a good pressure tool, but if you're only growing it by like 2 or 3, that's when I think this card kind of scales off. Now it does also have a cool side condition or side sort of I guess like option 2, which is to draw an ally 5+ power. We see cards like Babbling Beark and Freljord have this ability, and that card is pretty decent. Although in Noxus itself, this tutor is a little bit worse, just because in Noxus decks overall, you have a lot more units or allies with that 5+ power already. So using this as a tutor is a little bit less it's a lot more conditional on how you want to build a deck. If you're building like a reputation deck, this is just a 2 mana draw 1, which I think is not that great. And also in a reputation deck, when you already have allies with 5+ power, like there's just like a redundancy of this card. So I'm not super impressed by this. In order to have like a really good tutor with this, you have to be a lot more creative in your deck building and also include Noxus into your deck. So I think this card just comes off a little bit weaker for me. I gave it a 3 stars there. I think it's still decent, can be used as a decent combat trick depending on your deck. With like Flame Chompers, if you burst someone out Flame Chompers and go to 5, that's pretty decent. But the draw itself is a little bit weak, and just in Noxus, this level of redundancy is maybe not so useful, but I can see it having some pretty cool niche cases. Next card, Brutal Skirmish, 3 mana fast speed card, destroy an ally or destroy an enemy's equipment, an ally and the enemy strike each other. So it's 3 mana, single combat for Noxus, and it has the upside of destroying an enemy equipment, which I honestly think is a little bit too niche. Destroying enemy equipment is very fantastic. I think we've seen this with Quietus. We've seen this with some other cards like Heavy Metal, things like that. But comparatively, I think this card's a little bit weaker. In Noxus, we have fantastic one-way strike cards like the 4 mana card with the Reputation, I forgot what it's called, and we have like Death Lotus. To specifically want to destroy an enemy's equipment and then strike each other, I think is a little bit more niche, and when you're only using this as 3 mana single combat, I think it definitely falls off a little bit. Because decks already aren't running things like, you know, Whirling Death or Bloody Business. And I don't really see this card like being power creeping either of those, so I'm giving this a 2 stars. Rune Squire though, next card, 2 mana, 2/1 challenger when I'm summoned, Reforge. I think this card just on base level is pretty solid. If we look at the Reforged package, when we have Blade Squire and Runekeeper, I think this card is definitely better than both of them. Especially when you can get either +2 weapon or the quick attack weapon. You can either have a 2/1 quick attack or like a 4/1 challenger. Both of those are just very decent off the board. Now, Reforge itself is on obviously a little bit on the weaker side with the ribbon and things like that. But I think out of all the other Reforged cards that we have, this one is probably the best one we have. So I'm gonna give this a solid 3 stars. Based off power level alone, I would maybe give it like 3.5, but overall, I'll just stick with 3. Next card on the right, we have Icathian Myths, a 2 mana burst speed spell from Noxus, or sorry, Demacia, that says create a Icathian Mirage in hand that costs 0 this round, which is a just a 3/2, or create a Golden Dispatch in hand, which is also 3/2 weapon. We'll see on the next page, but it's a 3/2 weapon for 2. This card is okay. I think the biggest selling point of this card is just creating a 2 mana weapon that's a 3/2 that you can use with like the Vayne cards, the auto equip cards, to just give yourself a little bit of a stat stick. So getting the Challenger card, which is a 4 mana 3/3 plus 3/2, so a 4 mana 6/5 Challenger, can be pretty decent, honestly. And just obviously it adds a little bit of consistency if you don't actually draw a weapon from your deck. Like having this is not bad. It's not great either, because just the idea of like generating a weapon for 2 mana itself is a little bit costly. So I think I gave this a 3 stars. I think the Icathian Mirage is a little bit less useful. You're just playing a 2 mana 3/2. Creating a Golden Dispatch in hand to synergize the rest of your deck if you don't draw a weapon seems pretty okay. But if you draw another weapon or you have other ways of generating weapons, the Golden Spatula is a 3/2 no keyword kind of stat stick. So just right off the bat, it's just I don't think as good. It's not really something you want to see. I don't know, because like 2 mana 3/2 is decent. Like Buried Armory 3 mana 4/4 is just so much better, because the health is just what really matters. So I'm not super sold on this card, especially when we have the Darkin Aegis right next to it, a 2 mana +1/+1, but it gives a tough, and it's also darkened, so it can be played separately as well. This is definitely the card you want to be main decking your card as one of the main equipments that you want to be equipping on and off and things like that, as a darkened card, just because it, even after the early game, you can play it out as the darken itself, but just +1/+1 and tough, that's so hard to beat. This card is the second 5-star card that we're going to be getting in this set, just because this as well, if you look at the dark itself, a 5 mana 4/3 challenge with tough, but your opponent's spells cost 2 more while I'm attacking. That is so huge. Plus cost 2 more is so crazy. If you think about all the Tailstones kind of cards we've been seeing, Tailstones into Homecoming is 5 mana, but with Jarl on board, it costs 3 + 7 is 10 mana. Wait, hang on. 1 + 4, but 3 plus 6, 9 mana. Like that's insane. You have to be a lot more proactive about how you want to use your removal. And you have to do it before they attack, right? So ideally you're doing it on their development turn when they play out Jorl before they attack. But if they play Jorl on your attack token and then they open attack into, all of a sudden you're just such a pickle, because now your spells just are unplayable almost, or you're spending a lot more mana. It's going to set you very far behind, and then you're still going to have to spend mana to remove it on the following turn if you can't remove it. I mean, this card is just a phenomenal pressure. This is exactly the kind of thing that Demacia loves. We've seen cards like the Stony Suppressor, the 2-mana 1/3, but that's only +1. Like, the pain of having just one Stony Suppressor on board. Now imagine having 2 of those, but also it's a 4/3 challenger with tough, and it can be played as a Darkin weapon early on. Like, the value of these Darkin weapons is just so insane. So I think this is easy 5 stars. It's similar level to like Bloodletters and the Lodestone, I would say. Next set of sort of variety cards, we have Wraith of Echoes, a 6-mana Shadow Owls card. That's a 2/5 that says round end, for each ally that died this round, grant all allied copies of it ever +1/+1. So let's say a Blade Squire died this round, then all the other Blade Squires in your deck gain a +1/+1, which is not great. It's a scaling kind of card, but its condition is a little bit awkward. It's round end, so even if the cards die and then this card gets removed, you don't get any payoff out of it. And you need an ally that you're consistently getting to play after it dies. So if you want something to scale, you need to have multiple copies of it. So you're running something like it's like Poro Cannon to get the Poros and like iteratives. Like, the payoff is just a little bit too outlandish to me. Is easily disruptible by like a Will, Homecoming, Vengeance, things like that. This card's a little bit too meme tier for me. 2 stars, meme card. I'd probably even give 1 star as pack filler. Just 1 star. 1 star of this card. Swinging Glaive, 3-mana, 2/1 equipment, strike, create a lucky find in hand in Shrima. Now, there's actually a lot more equipments than you might know. There's some additional equipments, but they're not Darkin weapons, right? And there's a lot of these that cost 3. There's the Plunder weapon, the Fearsome weapon, the Spear, and Shadow Isles. And it's easy to forget about these cards because they just don't see play. And the big kicker here is 3 mana. They don't synergize with any of the auto-equip cards, and I think there are conditions, stat sticks, no keywords, is a very low dangling fruit. Pack filler for me. Opulent Foyer, 3-mana landmark. When I'm summoned or you gain the attack token, summon a Ghostly Band, which is a 2-mana or a 2/1 the keyword, the 2-mana ephemeral hollowed unit, which is cool. It's a little bit, I think, low of a payoff. It's pretty cool when you play as a 3-mana card and it summons a Ghostly Band, and it allows you to scale a little bit. But just having a landmark requiring 2 units on board, the landmark itself and then the Ghostly Band that you're summoning, I think it's quite limiting. It doesn't really fit harrowing decks either. Although this card, I don't think it's like super slow. It's just a little bit awkward, the board space, and it's not really a card you want to be sticking onto board. Eventually you want to have a full board overriding this and just kind of setting things up. And I think this card overall is just a little bit too weak. So I gave this a 2 stars. The next card, though, this card is phenomenal to me. Moonlit Glenkeeper, 3-mana, 2/3 fearsome. When you summon an ephemeral ally, grants it +1/+0. Nightfall, summon a sapling, which is a 2/1 ephemeral challenger unit. So essentially, if you Nightfall this card out, you get a free 3/1 challenger. And this is already just a 3-mana, 2/3 fearsome, which is not bad in itself. But this card is so stupidly insane, I think. 5 stars. Even if you don't summon another ephemeral unit in the game, just this sheer tempo of a 3-mana 2/3 summoning a 3/1 challenger is so insane. You can run this in a Nightfall deck. You can run this in a Fearsomes deck. You could run this as like a pseudo like mid-rangey control deck, just summoning a 3/1 challenger. You can play this with even the Sapling Toss card. You could play this as just 2 blockers for 1. And as an ephemeral, just dissuades attacks as well. I think this card is so insane. It's so flexible. It's so good. It's actually insane as a card. And I honestly don't think we've seen many cards just sheerly on this level of power for a single card, especially like a 3-drop. Granted, it can't really block that well itself. I think this card is just phenomenal overall. So I'm giving this a nice solid 5 stars. I think this card will see a lot of play. It reminds me of like it's like a pre-nerf aloof travelers to me. That kind of power level. Next up, Seraphine. Oh boy, Seraphine. Seraphine's a super sweet card. If you haven't seen the actual teaser videos for any of these champions, I would highly recommend watching them over on the Runeterra YouTube channel. But Seraphine is definitely one of the most excited champions I am for this set. She's a 2-mana 1/4 in Piltover and Zon. Reads, when I'm summoned, create a random new 2-cost spell in hand. New being one of the newest keywords. Just being a card that you haven't played before. And her level up is when you played 6 unique spells this game. Cool. But when she's leveled up, when I'm summoned or create a random 2-cost spell in hand, so the same like upside. But when you play a new spell that costs 2 or less, copy it with the same targets. So this is essentially what Karma does. Granted that you have to play a new spell, so any of the 6 spells you've played already don't count. But having a Karma level effect on cards, especially when you can reduce the cost of certain cards, is insane. This card is nuts. 1/4 already is decent stat line. You can block into aggro twice, and you just get so much value out of Seraphine level 2. I think deck building for her will be super interesting. The ratioing on what kind of cards you want to duplicate and things like that. And there's so much more support cards I will get to. But I'm giving Seraphine a nice, easy 5 stars. When you have a Karma level power, even something like Jace, but Jace is only to the first 6+ card each round and levels a lot slower. Seraphine is just absolutely nuts comparatively. Next card, High Note, which is also Seraphine's champion spell, reads a 2-mana fast speed spell, deals 2 to a unit. If you've leveled Seraphine, essentially deal 1 to another unit. So essentially Mystic Shot, granted it can't go face, but has an upside for which if you've done it, you deal 1 to another unit. And I think this card is actually pretty decent. It's definitely not better than Mystic Shot per se, but because just the flexibility of being able to use as a burn card is really, really high. But this whole idea of Seraphine where you need to play new spells, you can run Mystic Shot and High Note in the same deck. And depending on when you draw either of them, you can use them either as a sort of, and you can like double them up, right? So doubling up High Note, dealing 4 to unit, 2 to another, is phenomenal. So just I think the deck building of Seraphine makes this card pretty decent, especially because it's also just her champion spell. 3 stars. Is flexible, which can just be used as an early game removal unit, and then you can still play Mystic Shot and double up later in the game, or use Mystic Shot early and then you draw High Note later and you can double this up with Seraphine. Overall, the flexibility is phenomenal. Great payoff to it, and if you can double it up, it's phenomenal. Next card, we have Acorn the Hextician, a 1-mana elusive 1/1 Nexus Strike. Reduce the cost of the most expensive spell in your hand by 1. I mean, there's not much I have to say here. It's a 1-mana 1/1 elusive that does something when it strikes. We've seen variants of this card throughout history. Zoe, Teemo, the very recent Vestine Disciple, and now Acorn the Hextician. Just the value that you get, granted that it's not the same as like drawing a card. But just cheapening things overall, you can cheapen things into discount for Seraphine. You can cheapen some really high impact spells. Like this kind of thing, if it gets 1 strike off, it's already value. It's like the Green Glade Lookout, the 2-mana 2/2 that reduces the highest cost unit in your hand. I think this also is a very, very similar level of power, and I think can absolutely just throw games into a loop when this strikes for 2, or you play like 2 of them. Like imagine this card's insane. 4 stars, staple into some of the decks we're going to see into the season. And here we have some of the most fantastic support cards I think we've seen for a champion. We'll start with the less lackluster one with Crowd Pleaser. 2-mana burst, give an ally +2/+0, and quick attack this round. Now I think that's already really solid for 2 mana. Like there's the Rising Spell Force, which is 3 mana, it's +4 and quick attack. That card doesn't really see much play, but Crowd Pleaser is 2 mana, so it's a little bit more decent. Obviously, the +2/+0 versus +4/+0, generally speaking, isn't really that big of a deal. It's really just this quick attack that's the most impactful one. Plus, an upside where it's Flow, create a 2 mana cost spell, new 2 mana cost spell in hand, which is pretty decent. You can either use this as a level Seraphine or double up on creating new spells when you already have a level Seraphine. But I think it's just it's okay. It's just decent card. Yeah, it's just decent. Maybe allows you to attack with Seraphine and then just like ask your opponent if they want to block. Um, you know what? This card's okay. Would I give it 3 stars? Yeah, I think it's a solid sort of tech card. You could play this champion like Vi, and that's actually really decent. Being able to generate a new 2 mana cost spell in hand is actually really good with Seraphine because I think that synergy is okay. It can either help you level up Seraphine faster while also just acting as like a value trade tool. But I struggle to see this as more than just simply a tech card. I struggle to see this as like a 3 of or maybe even a 2 of in any of like these decks. It's still a pretty decent card. But Drum Solo is kind of what takes the cake here. 5 mana burst, draw 2. You're like, yeah, okay, that's pretty okay. But Flow reduced those cards cost by 2. I don't really have much to say here. Mana cheating. Last season I was playing Bar Keep Karma the entire season, having the ability to discount cards by 1, by 2, by 3. So good, and it's just so good at keeping your opponent on their toes. It's very hard to play around a card like this depending on what you draw. You can cheat out more expensive cards early on, or you can just stack like 0 mana Mystic Shot, 2 mana Deny, whatever card it is. Just reducing the cost makes it so much more difficult to play around. And just 5 mana draw 2 is just pretty decent overall. But when you're getting that discount, it's basically a 1 mana draw 2 if you kind of want to think about it like that. And 1 mana draw 2 is broken. That's sorry, easy. Easy 5 stars. One of the strongest draw cards we're ever gonna see in Legends of Runeterra. Now we have Fan Club Present, 4 mana 2/2. Manifest a spell that costs 5 and set its cost to 2. Like, on God, man. These are some of the most mana cheating cards I think we've really seen. Because I played a lot of Back Alley Bar, which just discounts any new card by 1. You play this as a 3 mana 2/2 and then generate a 5 mana spell that costs 1. Like, this level of mana cheat is like absurd. And there's some decent 5 mana spells out there. Not that I can name them off the top of my head because that's really tough, because we've really never seen anything that generates a spell that costs 5. It's always been 6+ or 3 less. But the pool of 5 mana spells when you play them for 2 can only be so bad. And I don't know, man. When you already have something like Back Alley Bar, when that 5 mana spell costs 2, synergizes with Seraphine, you can double cast it. Like, there's just so much cheating going on here and so much value. This card is 4 stars. Okay, Seraphine's High Note, we've already talked through this. I'm not going to go over it. But next card we have here is Inspired Plans. This one's a little bit interesting. 2 mana +1/+1 equipment in PNZ. So you can actually use this on the auto equip stuff. But it says attack, create a new 2-cost spell in hand and give it fleeting. Fleeting, it's this weapon's a little bit weaker. Just 2 mana +1/+1 with no keywords is definitely a little bit of a lackluster sort of equipment. And its attack's a little bit awkward as well because it's fleeting. So if you're gonna play this card, you're having to spend 2 mana on it, and then also semi-committing to playing whatever card that you're getting off of it. Otherwise, there's really no point in actually running this weapon. So I think this is definitely a little bit on the weaker side of things. I don't know if you specifically need to be generating stuff like this, or because like you could also be playing a lot more focused kind of generation, just playing manifest cards from like Banal City with like Trinket Trade and Apologist, and there's not really much need for this kind of card. So 2 stars. I don't think this card is particularly impressive. You can do some funny things with it for sure, just like get some infinite value off of it, but doesn't really impress me, and definitely just a step down compared to like the Darkin stuff for sure. Now we have a Zon Diva 8 mana 7/5, but it says play, deal 1 to all enemies. If you've played 6+ new spells this game, deal 3 instead. So it reminds me very much so of Decinata. Same mana cost, same attack, 1 less health, doesn't have I forget if Designator has quick attack, but it deals 3 essentially. Ideally, it deals 3. You don't want to play this for 1, that sucks. You can play like Chempunk Shredder in your deck. But dealing 3 is actually really, really decent, especially in Piltover and Zon, which historically doesn't really have that level of board clear. When we think about what they have like Rocket Barrage, they have Chempunk Shredder, stuff that deals 1 to all, but never something like 3. So if you can pull this off, it's pretty decent. I don't know if Seraphine decks really need this kind of card, because when it's turn 8, you have level Seraphine and you're probably doing things that are stronger than this card. But maybe you can draw this off of like the flow card and make it cost 6, and then it's like pretty decent. But there's already like Hexite Crystal that deals 2 if you can fish for it. And you can even double that up with Seraphine. You can't double this up, it's a unit. It's quite expensive. I think the card's cool. I don't think it's that good, but it's cool. So I'll give it 3 stars. Maybe it draws a 1 of in your deck, and then you can just like absolutely smash your opponent. But outside of that, I think there's just a lot more powerful things you can be doing. But in case you miss on all of those completely, then at least you have a little bit of a backup, and that just like helps reset board install. Next set of cards, we have some Ionia cards. The first card, we have the Witness, a 4-mana 3/3 play, stun an enemy. So Arachnoid Sentry, 4-mana 3/3, but flow I cost 2 less, so potentially a 2-mana 3/3 Arachnoid Sentry. I mean, just by if you're playing it slow, it's already levels of Concussive Palm, right? 4-mana 3/3 versus 4-mana 3/2. If your opponent develops, you can play it, but if you flow, it costs 2 less. So this level of development Punisher that also comes to the body is relatively unseen in Ionia. Now it's very similar to something like Concussive Palm, but it's on a unit, I suppose. That can only be so bad, right? You can fork your opponent the palm and then have Witness if they develop. So it just gives you a little bit more flexibility, and it's not something you have to go to like Noxus Ionia for. So you don't need to have like Arachnoid Sentry plus palm. You can just have Witness plus palm and already be forking your opponent. So just being able to fork your opponent with development and open attack punishers in one region, I think is very, very solid. So I gave this a 3 stars. The card itself, I think, is solid. It's definitely a little bit more niche because the number of decks that, well, it could be really decent because like when we see like the Demacia Darkin, the Joral, like this is pretty decent in that when you have a card like a stun that is not a spell but also comes to the body, I think that kind of concept is quite decent and is something really, really good. So this card can only be so bad. I don't know if it's like super good because, you know, Ionia has a lot of options. They have Palm, they have Tempest, they have Will, they have Homecoming, and then you can add in a Witness. This is actually a pretty decent Homecoming target if you think about it. Like you Telestone's Hoko this and then cost 2 the next turn. This card, 3.5, maybe even like close to 4, but for now I'll be a little bit more conservative and give it a 3. Spirit of Wuju, 5-mana 4/3 flow. I cost 2 less. When I'm summoned, draw a spell. I think this card in comparison is definitely a little bit on the weaker side of things. 3-mana 4/3 that draws a spell. It's decent. You really don't want to be playing this when you don't have flow, but this draw spell kind of thing is definitely a little bit more easier to kind of access. You can simply just be playing a draw spell. You can be playing like Deep Med. You can be playing Sign In. And this only drawing a spell that's not even a tutor. I think this card's like okay. You definitely don't want to be caught playing this out flow, whereas Witness I think is definitely a little bit more acceptable because it also just 4 mana. It's very similar to Palm, whereas this card, if it's 5 mana 4/3 draw a card, that's actually just the worst Shadow Assassin kind of deal. So this card is definitely a little bit worse to me. I think I gave it a 2 stars. Definitely weaker than Witness. I think definitely better replacements for this card, such as like Deep Med and things like that. So I'm not super high on this card. So the next card, Unworthy Soul. 5 mana, fast speed card, flow I cost 2 less. Recall a unit or landmark. If it has any attachments, destroy them first. Now this card is absolutely insane. Because when we think about weapon destruction, which is so powerful, something like Heavy Metal, Quietus, when we have all these Darkin weapons that are super good. Now obviously in the early game people want to attach the weapons onto their units and then play the Darkins later on. And if you're recalling a unit that has a weapon, that's double value, right? They're paying the mana to replay the unit, and then they're paying the mana to equip the unit. And having something like Unworthy Soul is super, super good because it's going to destroy the equipment. So they can't play that Darken later on in the game. And I think it's a very fantastic way to counter things like the Darken Lodestone, the I can't pronounce that card for the life of me. Jarl. And it costs 3. It's a Will of Ionia for 3. Like, this card is nuts on every single aspect, and it's exactly what Ionia wants to sort of counter these Demacia decks that have the equip cards. Not that, you know, Ionia wasn't already doing that, but also the ability to recall landmarks is homecoming level of power as well. So 3 mana Hoko kind of effect. 3 mana will kind of effect. This card is phenomenal. I could even give this card 5 stars, 4.5, whatever you want it, but at the minimum 4 stars. This card is absolutely crazy. Now we have some more fun ones. Dragon Caller, 6 mana, 3/5 attune, round start flow, summon the Empyrean and granted ephemeral. So the Empyrean is the 6/5 elusive dragon. So this is granting an ephemeral, so it's just like a leveled up whatchamacallit. Eye of the Dragon. Now, Eye of the Dragon is good because it's a 2 mana attune card that summons a lifesteal dragonling and comes down a lot earlier. Now, this card is hilarious though. I will say this card applies a lot of pressure, something a 6/5 for free. Assuming you have flow. This card's really funny. It's actually maybe decent. But it's a little bit too memey for me. It might actually be like a 2.5 3 stars kind of level of card, but the kind of Ionia decks right now are just super, super fast at being able to kill your opponent. The 6 mana kind of thing reminds me of like Hydravine levels of slowness, and Ionia doesn't really need that kind of thing. So this card's super funny, super flavorful because, you know, we have Eye of the Dragon and Dragon Hollow. I love this sort of like evolution of cards that just keeps like the sense of lore alive in this game. Or lore in this game alive, but it's just a little bit too funny for me. So 2 stars. Darkin Harp, the next Darkin, but in PNZ, a 2 mana, a +2 attack, quick attack. You may spend 8 mana to play me as Styratu, which is an 8 mana, 8/6 quick attack. This is draw 2, then reduce those cards' cost by 2. So just on face value, 2 mana +2 quick attack, and is like not bad. We already have a very comparative card in the Improvise, which is just a 2 mana +2 quick attack as well. But I think this Darkin is a little bit, it's strong. The effect is very strong, but I think PNZ doesn't really need this kind of effect, which wants me to give this a little bit lower rating. Now, maybe you play PNZ just for this equipment and maybe some other strong tempo cards, and you can play this in, like I said, the Demacia mid-range deck, and then that could be pretty decent. But I'm a little bit more skeptical on this card. Definitely seems a little bit weaker to me, very close to like something like Naga Nectin for the Noxus card. So I'm giving this a 2 stars. Definitely on the weaker side of the Darken weapons overall. Definitely doesn't hold a candle to Harazi or Zalani or Jarar. Oh my god, Jarl. But it's still kind of cool. Like, Darken weapons can only be so bad, but this is definitely one of the weaker Darkens for sure. Next card is very, very interesting because I don't think I really saw this one looking at the cards, but Zon Bouncer, 4 mana flow? Jesus Christ. 4 mana 4/4 round start flow, refill 2 spell mana. Like, I think this card is actually super low key. Like, a 4 mana 4/4 in PNZ is actually really decent. PNZ lacks good blockers, and 4 mana 4/4 is definitely nothing to scoff at. And this effect is actually quite good. In Seraphine decks, you're proccing flow really, really easily, and you're just getting 2 mana back every round start. Like, this is a decent sort of back row engine. I would maybe comparatively compare it to like Yoral Captain, for example. Like, I think this card is actually relatively low key. I'm definitely interested in trying this card out for sure. And also a lot of PNZ decks kind of lack like a decent turns 4, turns 5. And so I think this card is actually pretty decent in filling that gap. So definitely a very, very good card in my mind. I'm giving this, I only gave it 3 stars. 4 stars is very, very scrutinizing. 3.5 at the very least, maybe borderline 4. I think this card is actually kind of low key. Okay, moving on to some of the more Bilgewater cards. I think there's one more champion. I forgot. This video is getting really, really long. But a few more variety cards, starting with the Bilgewater Darkin, a 2-mana +1 fearsome card. As an attack, draw 1 at next round start and grant it fleeting. And then you may spend me as 9 mana to play out as Iberos. So this 2-mana +1 fearsome, attack 1 at next round, grant it fleeting. I don't know. This card's strange. So very similar to something like pick a card, which is 2 mana, draw 2 fleeting. Granted, you have to shuffle card in. So imagine you play this card, you shuffle this card in, and then you draw 2. Yeah, you can use those multiple value if you get multiple attacks out of at once. You don't really want to re-equip this every time to draw 1. Seems a little bit weak to me. Fearsome is cool because it applies pressure. Not a lot of decks deal with fearsome very well, but looks a little bit weak to me. The payoff isn't great, right? You're drawing a card that's fleeting. It forces you to build your deck in a certain way where you either don't want to play this early on in fear of giving fleeting to a key card that you can't play yet, which is like the danger of playing Pool Shark before something like turn 4, right? In a lot of different decks. So I'm a little bit suspicious of this card. It's definitely a card you want to be attaching early on to try to, just cycle through your deck and get some value. But depending on the deck you kind of play, it does force you to play a certain way. And its payoff, 9 mana, 0/0. I have +1/+1 for every card that you draw in this game. I can only be blocked by enemies with 4 or more power. So essentially like pseudo fearsome, but a little bit better. And this card can scale, right? It's at the very least like a 10/10, and obviously if you're drawing through your deck, it's 15/15, 20/20 with pseudo fearsome, which is like not bad, honestly. Like if that's the payoff for your deck, it's obviously really slow because you're paying 9 for it. But like what Bilgewater deck are you getting to turn 9 and still need to play this? I think I gave this a little bit lower score, 2 stars. It's kind of same level as the PNZ Darkin in my mind. A little bit late as a payoff and not as impactful early game. Tesla Spirit, 1 mana Bilgewater focus card. Give an enemy vulnerable this round. If it dies, deal 1 to the enemy Nexus. Now this card sucks. You don't want to main Nexus card. I think I gave it a 1 star. But when you get this card off of Burblefish, now you have a third 1 mana grant vulnerable card. You have the Shakedown, you have the Even Warned, and now you have Tesla Spirit. I mean, come on. That's one of the most insane cards to hit because you're buffing up your board with like Nami or Shelly, and then you're killing a unit with vulnerable. Like this kind of card is like nasty as hell, but it's obviously not a card you want to be playing in your deck. So while this card is good when joining off of Burblefish, it's still a 1 star for me. Scrappy's Parts of Palooza, 2 mana landmark. When I'm discarded, summon me. When you summon a Mecha Yordle, granted a random keyword. As far as Mecha Yordle support cards go, I think this card is phenomenal. A lot of Mecha Yordle support or Mecha Yordle cards. Discard a card to generate a Mecha Yordle. So if discarding this card, you're gaining value from the discard, which is something that's really good. Because when you're discarding your hands, you're running out of value. Now, granted, you don't really get a draw out of it, and you're summoning giving a random keyword to a Mecha Yordle. Like, that's just not very good overall. So, good support tool. Some Mecha Yordle lovers might give it a chance, but to me, I don't really see the impact of this card. Meme tier, 2 stars. Oh my god, how much more do we have to go? A few more variety cards. We have Fracture from Freljord, 2 mana slow speed card, deal 1 to everything or destroy units equipment. So deal 1 to everything, so Ice Shard, right? Slow speed Ice Shards, 2 mana Ram Stance, or destroy units equipment. For 2 mana to destroy units equipment, that's already a lot worse than Heavy Metal. And if you want to play out a slow speed Ice Shard for 2 mana, I don't think that's worth it. Ice Shard at 3 mana is just a lot more flexible because it's fast speed, and then you have Ram Stance, which is I think just a lot better. This card kind of stinks. 1 star. Warden of the Tribes, 9 mana, 6/6 overall. When I'm summoned, grant allies +1/+1 for each different subtype you summon in this game. You have to grant allies on board. You have to build your deck in a really stupid way. No offense. It's a 9 mana card. It doesn't buff itself. I'm not sure. Grants allies. I'm always confused if this grants itself. I don't think it does. This card sucks. 1 star. Twilight Protector. 2 mana 2/2 Daybreak. Give Daybreak allies +1/+1 this round. Nightfall. Grant Nightfall allies +1/+0. And this card is definitely a little bit on the weaker side of things. In a traditional Daybreak deck, you're not wanting to... Playing this on turn 2 doesn't really do much because this obviously doesn't buff itself. If playing it late, it doesn't really have the same impact. It's like decent, right? If you're playing this with like Leona and Raven on board, grant you're already getting a stun, which is cool. And then giving allies +1/+1 this round, that's on the level of like Morning Light. So essentially it's like Morning Light, but it just sucks early on, right? It's not very impactful, doesn't have stats to fight. And Daybreak's known to have like stats on board, right? 1 mana 3/3, 2 mana 3/6, 3 mana 3/4, 5 mana 5/6, things like that. And this doesn't really provide it. This whole like giving allies +1/+1 this round, I think have to be a little bit more niche and supportive rather than just being slapped on a unit. So I don't really see much hope for this. Nightfall is a little bit better, but Nightfall cards without keywords, like if you're not giving to like a Shade Stalker, like a Diana, like a Nocturne at least has Fearsome, this effect's just kind of weak. I'm giving this a 2 stars. This card is just not super strong in my mind. All right, finally moving through, we have the Darkin cards. Finally onto Varus and his support package. Varus himself, 4 mana 3/4 Origin, the Arrow of Retribution, auto equip the Darkin bow, which we'll see on the next slide. But generally speaking, it's very similar to Kayn, where you can run any and all cultist cards. You can still tutor out Varus after playing 3 cultist spells. Kayn is when you play 3 cultist units. And he's a 3 mana 3/4 with quick attack. He has a spell that says Varus's Chain of Corruption, give an enemy vulnerable and give an ally +1/+0 this round, and then it creates a fleeting copy. So very similar to like Ruthless Predator, but only +1/+1 attack, but you can use it multiple times in a turn, which I think is super, super cool. We'll go into Vayne's other stuff, but Vayne overall, I'm going to give 4 stars because when he levels up, he has Overwhelm and Quick Attack. Obviously, on 4 mana. That's pretty decent. 4 mana, 4/5 Quick Attack, Overwhelm. But his bow allows him to scale +10 attack, granting to a 14/5 Quick Attack, Overwhelm. And when you see some of the support cards in his set, I think you'll see that this rating makes a little bit more sense. It's like Vi, both Overwhelm, and I think that's like really, really decent. Just because I think his package is actually really, really sick. So let's jump into his package. Oh, his champion spell, 3 stars. It's pretty cool. Nice niche scenario for Varus because he already has quick attack, things like that. Obviously, can't main deck this card, so having a strong champion spell, cool. Okay, so the first thing we'll go over some of the more cultist units, and then we'll go into the cultist spells. So starting with the first one, we have Ambitious Cultist, 4 mana 3/5 in PNZ. Once you've equipped an ally this game, create a new spell that costs 2 in hand and set its cost to 2 or to 0. So this is like bleeding between like Seraphine synergy and just like a little bit of extra value in a cultist deck. When you'll see that this when you've equipped an ally condition is really not much of a condition, so you can pretty much ignore that. So 4 mana 3/5 that says create a new spell that costs 2 in hand and set its cost 0. Like 4 mana 3/5 is a decent blocker. Creating just a free spell is like decent as well. It's just decent. That's all I can really say about this card. Just a decent card. And decent, I don't know if decent's good enough. Like you're not manifesting this card. You're just getting a 4 mana 3/5 body, and that's just okay. 2 stars for me. Blooming Cultist, 3 mana attuned cultist. Once you've equipped an ally in this game, grant me elusive. So 3 mana 3/2 elusive, both attune. Now we've seen some of these like conditional 3/2 elusive cards, something like Swole Scout or the Mirai card, and generally speaking, they aren't that great. In a cultist deck where like Kayn or Varus, I guess with Varus, they're both sort of beatdown decks, so just having like a cheap elusive can be okay, but it's also just decent. I think it's a little bit better than the cultist card because just elusive in itself is really, really nice, and attune giving you back mana when you are running cards, potentially like Momentous Choice, is pretty cool as well. So 3 stars for me. For Cultist, though, 1 mana 2/2 when equipped allies attack, deal 1 to the enemy Nexus in Bilgewater. So very similar to like Crackshot Corsair, definitely more conditional because it needs to see equipped allies attack and not just allies attack, but it's a 1 mana 2/2 with an upside. And I think we all know where this is going. That's just decent. Even outside of a cultist deck, I think this can see play. Even like plunder decks that already run some equipped cards, like the 3 mana equipped card, like this card can be okay. And it's not like super good, but I think this has potential synergy in other decks outside of strictly cultist decks, and I think that in itself is a little bit of a nice reward. So I'm gonna give this 4 stars. We'll see. Like a 1 mana 2/2 with an upside can only be so bad. Now, Icevale Cultist, on the other hand, 5 mana 5/5 and Froward equipped allies have Overwhelm. Like, it's a little bit interesting because in Cultist deck with either Kayn or Varus, they already have Overwhelm. They're your biggest boys, and they already have Overwhelm. Your other cards are probably a lot smaller. I don't know what kind of other cards you have that are scaling that can kind of also benefit from Overwhelm. Can this card survive outside in a Froward deck that has equipped? I don't know. Froward doesn't really have many good equip tools. Its effect is quite strong, I will say that, but I think this like kind of thing is definitely a little bit weaker than some of the other things we might see. So I'm gonna give this 2 stars. And then finally, Lunari Cultist. When I'm summoned or you've equipped an ally this game, create a gem in hand. So essentially, this creates a gem on summon, and then if you've already equipped, it creates another gem automatically. So at most, you get 2 gems out of it, which is nice because it synergizes with Varus. I forgot this part, but Varus levels when you've targeted allies 8 times. So it can be a decent way to progress your Varus level up. I just think this like really falls off later on. Like it doesn't really have the stats to trade very well. Like if you play this and then your opponent attacks with 3/2, you don't have the prio to like play the gem to trade. And if it's that early in the game and you only get 1 gem out of it, you'd rather just like play a mountain goat, right? Granted, this is a cultist unit, so it synergizes with Kayn, but I think overall the power level of this card's a little bit weaker, so I'm gonna give it 2 stars. I think we're getting to the end. Oh, okay. Arrow of Retribution is Varus's origin, so mirroring Kayn's origin, but when you play 3 cultist spells, draw Varus. Piercing Bolt is the skill for the Brew cultist. Varus's equipment, the Darkin Bow, which is a 2-mana equipment. When you play a spell or equip an ally, give me +1/+0, a max +5/+0 until the next time my bearer strikes. So just like a pseudo Vi, it increases your attack for a turn. After it strikes, it reduces it, which is cool. It strikes, so if your ally doesn't strike, you retain the buff, which is cool. So it's not like in a round. It's not like I don't know, when after you have token or whatever it is. It's when the bearer strikes. The Expanse Protection, 4 mana burst speed spell, cultist spell. Once you've equipped an ally this game, I cost 2 less. Give an ally spell shield this round. So 2 mana, give spell shield this round. And I think this is where you start to see why I think Varus is actually pretty decent. Varus is really built as, if you want to focus on Varus, it's sort of an all-in kind of like just beat down your opponent champion, because you can just have a 14/5 quick attack overwhelm. And then when you have a card that says 2 mana, give spell shield for this round, like that's a very decent way of protecting Varus. And this card is really good at that. Although I think there's a lot of good cultist spells, and this one is definitely a little bit more situational. So I'm gonna give it 3 stars just because I think it's very situational. If you don't need it, this card's kind of useless. Doesn't really have any upsides, doesn't give stats. But overall, if you need a spell shield in the round, like this is great. 2 mana spell shield, just really can't beat that. Next to it, Sudden Surge, 4 mana cultist spell, burst once you've equipped an ally, cost 2 less, same kind of thing. Grow an ally to 5/5 this round. Now, I think this is also in a similar spot where I think it's very powerful. A 2 mana spell that grows an ally to 5/5 is very good at trading up into your opponent. How many copies of this do you want? You're not using, like, that's where the question comes in. You're not using this on Varus. You can if you want to heal it a little bit. But if you're using this on like a 4/4, like you're getting diminishing returns depending on the unit you play with it. And if you're playing smaller units like Lunari Cultists that don't really have that high of an upside, you're playing a weaker card to like grow it up to like do better things. So it's definitely a little bit like interesting. I think it's the same levels of redundancy we're getting at. Like you're already having some pretty decently sized unit. And it's just hard to run too many copies of this. Definitely one of the better combat tricks I've seen. Like growing a 5/5 is just so insane, especially if you use this on like a, there's some pretty good cards. Like there's the 4/3 like Ranger Knight Defector, the 4/3 Scout with Tough. Like that 5/5 is really really strong. You can give this on to Zoe or something like that. Just a 1/1 elusive. Like there's some good applications for it, but I think overall it's a little bit tricky in how you on ratio and things like that. I think it's still very solid overall, 3 stars. Okay, I think there's one more after this, but this is where I think the cultist thing really kicks in. One of the weakest aspects of Runeterran champions overall was the lack of spells, because the Runeterran region doesn't actually have any spells, and cultist is kind of breaking out of that shell, and we're getting some of the 3 strongest spells I think we've seen in a long time. Starting with Unending Wave, 4 mana burst, it discounts by 2 once you've equipped. Draw 2 and give them fleeting. 2 mana, draw 2. Say less. Fleeting, yes. You just build your deck a little bit. It's basically pick a card, but you get your cards now. And as we know, now is better than later. Time concept of money. Now is always better than later. I mean, this is insane, right? 2 mana, draw 2. All these like conditions, you can just throw out the window. You play Varus, you play Kayn, all of a sudden the condition is met. Let's keep going. Unforgiving Cold. Sorry, Unending Wave, 4 stars. Fantastic card. Unforgiving Cold. Burst Cultist card. Frostbite, the strongest enemy. If you've equipped an ally this game, copy me. It's 4 mana Harsh Winds. Cultist card. You have draw, you have stall, and then you have Violent Discord. Fast speed, deal 1. If you've equipped an ally, copy me the same targets. Now you have Mystic Shot. So you have draw, you have stall, and you have early game removal all in a cultist deck, all in a Runeterran deck, which now you're covering up a huge weakness that these cards originally had, which was the fact that you just had to play another region of spells and you were locked to only one more region of spells. But now you have so much power coming from some of the newer cards. 4 stars across the board for all these fantastic cards. Some of the highest power level cards I think we've seen. Now, granted, something like Mystic Shot doesn't really come off as very strong, but now you don't need to be in P and Z to get this kind of effect. You don't need to be in Freljord with your Runeterran champion to get this kind of effect, and you don't need to be in Bilgewater to get this draw kind of effect with your Runeterran champion. Like, so much flexibility in deck building because you just get these free cards in your cultist package. It makes a little bit less sense to me. These restrictions just kind of seem a little bit tossy. But what's also very fantastic about these cards, you can just play them in your respective regional deck. You don't need it to be a cultist card. As long as you have an equip. Bilgewater has good equip. PNZ has decent equip. Freljord maybe less, but you can just splash something like Ionia, Hookmaster, whatever it may be. Just run your regions like Darkin Weapon, whatever it may be. You have good options. You have improvised cards. You have equipment. These are super easy to activate, and their payoff is absolutely insane. I lied. We might have one more after this, but Camouflage Horror, some of the more variety cards, 7 mana, 5/3 Fearsome plus Evolve. Play, I strike an enemy. So it is a one-way strike. This can be just like a 7/5, a strike for 7. So sort of like Vengeance on a stick, which pretty much is what it is. It's pretty okay. As we've seen, like Kai's decks, generally speaking, have been cutting some of the top end. A lot of them are curving out on Kai'Sa. Question of whether or not Void A-Bomb really fits the bill is sort of up in the air. This card doesn't really fit in any other deck that doesn't evolve. You just don't really need this kind of card. This card's like okay, but it's not fantastic to me. If you're running like a slower version of Kai'Sa, maybe you slot one in when you're curving. It's like A-Bomb, but this card overall is just okay. It doesn't really have Spell Shield. It can be denied. This card can be removed, and I assume the skill fizzles. It's maybe like 2.5. This card's okay. First, let's assume that one of the more interesting cards we see is a 2 mana burst speed card that says predict, cool, but give a unit I take double damage, and if I would die, obliterate me instead this round. And what I think is really interesting about this card is also doubles overwhelm damage. So if you have an overwhelm attacking into it, you're doubling the damage, and then all the excess damage that's doubled hits the Nexus. So just absolutely fantastic kind of effect. Very similar to something like Disintegrate, where if you're stacking removal, you're stacking whatever it may be, That damage is getting doubled. Unit is getting obliterated as well, so no death rattles, no strike effect, no whatever. And you also get to predict on top of that. Like, this card is niche, but I think it's absurdly powerful when it hits. And so I will also just tentatively give this a 5-star rating because I think this card is absolutely groundbreaking. It's just probably going to take some time to find the sort of right deck for it, but I think it has so much upside, allows you to push so much damage, allows you to deny death rattles, sorry, Hearthstone term, last breaths, and whatever it may be. Double up your removal. It seems pretty decent. Last card, Altar of Blood, 2-mana landmark. When you slay a unit, reduce the cost of your next Darkin unit you play by 1. This one seems a little bit slow. You have to pay 2 mana up front, and then you have to slay a unit, and then that reduces the next Darkin unit you play by 1. It's a little bit conditional. Like, this requires a much different sort of deck to like really get a lot of use out of it. And just like discounting Darkin units, not even like, oh, it's Darkin, so it's like Kane and, oh, that was Cultist. Darkin itself, you have Kane, Varus. What else do you have for Darkins? I kind of forgot the Darkin pool. I thought it was like Cultist, so I give it a 1-star. But even if it's like discounting Kane and things like that, I don't know. Even like 2 stars, no higher than 2 would be my opinion. But I think that is the end. We have reviewed all the cards. I have given you my ratings for all of them. Let me guys know what you guys agree or disagree with. Today will be the expansion day, so in a couple of hours you will be getting to play all these cards. I would love to know what you're excited to try out, what these cards you think are really, really good, and maybe we can argue what cards you think I got wrong. So feel free to leave those in the comments below. This video is over an hour. Holy frick, dude. Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you guys for watching all. If you made it all to the end, I love you guys. Thank you so much. But I'll try to do like an update video in a couple weeks. I don't want it to be another hour. Jesus Christ. Okay, I need to stop talking. I'll see you guys later. Peace out, guys.